Hello, this is Tim DeLeon from Focus First, and this is a short little presentation where we compare the differences between scattergram pricing and price per square foot. Now, whenever I give a presentation, it's not uncommon for someone to raise their hand and to let me know that scattergram pricing won't work for their area. And the reason they state that is because price per square foot doesn't work for their area. And so one of the things you're going to see here is there's a big difference when doing scattergram pricing and comparing that to price per square foot. Additionally, we're going to take a look at the search. This is going to help you really understand how to use search more effectively. What we find when we do market analysis with people throughout the US and Canada, that if you get your initial search correctly done, everything just seems to fall out. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the search as well. So let's go. Now, this is the first scattergram I want to show you. And this is a classic scattergram that we see all over the US and Canada. In this case, this is a really easy to see scattergram in the sense that there's a strong correlation between price and size, and all the dots are pretty close to the trend line. So what you're going to see down here, basically, I want to point out at the very bottom of the trend, right down here at the very early part, the data point is just below the fair market value line or the trend line. And right at the top, again, the data point is just below the trend line and scale. So they're pretty comparable in the sense of their relationship between the trend line. So what does that mean for price per square foot? Well, we can easily calculate the price per square foot because we have the price right here. We also have the square foot. So let's go ahead and make that calculation and see what that looks like. So here's what that will look like. You can see at the very bottom, let's just focus on the ends. At the very bottom, the price per square foot is $169, which is the price per square foot. At the very top, at the same trend line, just slightly, the dots just slightly below the trend line, the price per square foot is $85 a square foot. So right off the bat, you can see there's a huge difference between price per square foot, almost a 2x difference in the price per square foot, and both of these are right on the same trend line. So just right off the bat, it's easy to see that price per square foot and scattergram pricing is not the same. As a matter of fact, if you really think about price per square foot, does that ever make sense, or when does it make sense? Let's ask that question. Obviously, price per square foot in the truest, purest sense doesn't make sense, because could you, at $169 a square foot, could you build a 1 square foot home for $169? Well, of course not. That's obvious. It turns out there's a lot of sunk costs associated with the purchase of a home just to even get started. You have to buy the land, you have to pay for permits, add in water taps, etc. So if you look closely at this, basically what you're going to find is that lower size homes have a higher price per square foot than the larger homes. That's because this sunk cost that we're talking about is spread across a larger size for some of the higher homes. Matter of fact, if you took a look at the price per square foot and plotted that against the square feet, you'd get something that looks like this, where there's almost an inverse relationship between the size and the price per square foot. The smaller the size, the larger the price per square foot. The larger the size, the smaller the price per square foot. Now let's take a look at another scattergram, which is going to be really quite interesting. This is a graph we like to use in the Ninja Selling class, and we've used it quite a bit. And here we again, we get lots of data points here, basically. For the most part, most of these data points are right next to the trend line. We have one exception with this property at the very bottom, 1844 Time Court, which does back to Harmony Crossing. Turns out all of these are in one subdivision. It's actually called Willow Springs. And there's one property that is near a kind of an inferior subdivision. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And it's sold way below the trend line. But again, let's go back to the price per square foot thing and talk a little bit about that. Let's calculate some of the price per square foot and look and see at the very top and at the very bottom. This is kind of what we saw in the previous scattergram. At the very bottom, the price per square foot, it's $160.50, about $160. At the very top, it's about $140. So there's a big difference between the smaller homes and the larger homes. It's a little bit more than $20 a square foot. As a matter of fact, if we were to calculate the price for the larger home based on the price per square foot of the smaller home, at 4,000 square feet, we would have priced it at another $80,000, which of course doesn't make sense. Okay, whereas on the scattergram, you can see how this all maps out really well. So let me ask a question. If we're saying that we're making all this discussion about price per square foot, if it doesn't work, why is it that so many tools use it? And why do appraisers use it? Albeit they also make adjustments, so you have to take that in consideration. But so many tools, in fact, most of the pricing tools out there heavily weigh on price per square foot. So how's that work? Well, it turns out if we look at the price per square foot on some of these other properties, what you're going to find out that when you compare two homes, if they're close in proximity based on size, the price per square foot can be fairly close. Take a look at these top two data points. The price per square foot are $138.90, $137, so respectively. So this is why appraisers state that when they want comps, they want to make sure that the comps are within 10% of the size of the property. So you can see if we group some of these properties together, you can do the price per square foot analysis by looking at homes that are pretty comparable in size. But what do you do about this property right here, which doesn't have a lot of homes close together? Matter of fact, when you're looking to price this property, you don't have this understanding. If you're not doing scattergrams, you don't really understand this relationship between price and size. If you're only using price per square foot, then when you do your comparisons, you have to limit yourself to properties that are plus or minus 10%. So when you're doing that, what are you doing? You're hiding all this data up here because none of those properties are within 10%. In addition, you're hiding this data down here as well. So when you're looking to basically price this property 1844 Time Court, you almost have no property comparisons within that same subdivision. Now, it turns out kind of the appraiser model is you have to look for homes like within a 1 mile radius or close by. So what happens, you end up looking at properties outside of this subdivision into neighboring subdivisions to look for homes that are comparable in size. And this is what the key issue is. When you do that, you compare this property to other properties that are in inferior neighborhoods. And this is the classic issue with a lot of the AVMs, the automated valuation systems. They do the kind of the radius search basically. And one of the things you'll find with focus first pricing is we really don't like the radius search. We like the map search, but usually when we do a map search, what we like to do is we like to look for what we call natural boundaries. And I'll set up a link down below here where you can kind of look at a little bit of a discussion on how you do your a search based on natural boundaries, looking for major streets, waterways, green belts. Those things are what we call natural boundaries. but we don't really like the radius search, okay? And so the result is when you do that, because you're looking for other homes that are comparable in size, because you have no idea what this relationship looks like, because you don't do a scattergram. If you're doing scattergram pricing, you understand this bigger relationship and you can price accordingly. But when you're not doing scattergram pricing and you're limiting your properties to plus or minus 10%, what you end up doing is going outside the neighborhood and comparing homes that are comparable in size, but really aren't comparable locations. And so a lot of times you make mistakes like that. Matter of fact, if you look at this property, in the history of this property, that's exactly what happened. This property, because it was compared to homes outside that neighborhood, listed for $397,500. It sold for $395,000, so slightly less than the list price. But look at the days to offer. That DTO is the days to offer. It basically went into contract within 3 days of being on the market, which is almost like instantly of being on the market. It went under contract, and it actually undersold because it was listed incorrectly, listed way below what we call the market trend for that neighborhood. As a matter of fact, if you look at, so let's talk a little bit about that search. And when you do your search, one of the things we do is the classic search is to search for all activity plus or minus 10% of the size of the subject property. Now, with focused first pricing, we really don't do that. Because if you do that, you lose all this other information that's valuable that gives you kind of that whole relationship between price and size for that neighborhood. In fact, this is an example of the search criteria we use in Focus First. You can see at the very top is a standard neighborhood. Notice one of the things, we don't have anything there. We don't have number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. We don't have size. What we're really focused on when we do this initial search is location. And everything tends to fall out. Now, for this specific example, I just wanted to show this to you. This is actually the differences between these neighborhoods. Now, in this case, it's really obvious, but in some cases, it may not be quite that obvious. And perhaps you can say, if you're really an experienced realtor for this area, you wouldn't include those properties. But if in some cases you would, because that you need some data, you need some comps, and if you're limiting yourself to plus or minus 10%, then guess what? You have to go outside the neighborhood, but stay within the location. But you can see there's a big difference between these two neighborhoods. And comparing homes between these two different neighborhoods is really not what you want to do. So what you want to do is, if you use the Focus First pricing model, focus on location, develop that whole market trend picture so you see that scattergram trend line, and you can price that much more effectively.